A king sits watching a play, but the real drama is not on that stage but elsewhere. It is inside his mind. A son, uncertain of truth, turns to theatre as a test, hoping that guilt will reveal itself without a single accusation. Words, gesture, and silence begins to communicate more meaning than active action. This is the turning point where performance becomes proof. This is Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 2. It's going to be a long, long scene. In Hamlet, you will have these kind of long scenes much more than in other plays by Shakespeare. Perhaps he was also trying to experiment with the length of the scenes to make us understand the way in which Hamlet's mind is also working, how time is dragging on inside him, how his various thoughts are making his vision of reality like these long drawn scenes. It's as if these scenes, which are actually keeping him away from acting out the revenge, communicate to us the unbearable length of that delay. In this scene, which takes place in the castle, there's a hall in the castle again, where Hamlet first begins talking with the players, the theatrical group, and he has already given them some lines to memorize, and this is how he instructs them on how to perform once they are ready for performance. Notice what Hamlet is telling them. I'll just quickly go over the main points here. Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. So he wants the players to speak the lines that he has given them, not with a lot of extra passion, but trippingly on the tongue. So he advocates moderation and control of expression. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. So he doesn't want extra emotion, extra passion, overacting, so as to say, when the lines, particularly about that special section which Hamlet has added in their play, he doesn't want them to speak out in a very passionate and unnatural manner. And then we'll just move on a bit. He also instructs them, be not too tame neither. So it's not that you will not add any kind of emotion or passion. So you have to practice moderation. But let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action. Now it is very interesting. I always have this feeling that Shakespeare was writing at least this part of Hamlet in a way as if he is instructing the players as to how to act in the play Hamlet itself. Because unlike the revenge tragedies of his time, which show a lot of intense action and speech and emotions running wild on stage, Hamlet is about restraint. Hamlet is about stopping oneself from doing something. So this is like the way Shakespeare would have wanted the players who would perform in Hamlet to act like. This is a very meta-theatrical way, I would say, where we have this feeling that Shakespeare himself is speaking through Hamlet about how acting should be done on stage. Finally, his third set of instructions. And let those that play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. Normally what happens whenever there is a character who plays the fool or the clown or the jester, they are given some lines on stage, but they overdo their part. They add their own jests and they go on making fun of things in order to entertain people. So Hamlet doesn't want that to happen with this particular play. He says that let them do only the part they are assigned, for there be of them that will themselves laugh, to set on some quantity of barren spectators to laugh too. Though in the meantime some necessary question of the play be then to be considered. So it is more important for him that the serious questions of the play be communicated in an appropriate manner. That's villainous and shows a most pitiful ambition in the fool that uses it. Go, make you ready. So he wants the focus to be on the serious part, and at the same time, he wants the players to act with restraint and control their emotions and use their discretion. So he sends them off to get ready, and we see Polonius, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern enter. When Hamlet asks them if the king is ready to see the play, Polonius says that they want to see the play right away, not just the king, but also Hamlet's mother. So Hamlet sends them off, saying that ask the players to make haste. So he is preparing us, the audience, for the climactic moment, the play within the play. Okay. After Rosencrantz and Guildenstern leave along with Polonius, he sees that Horatio has come. And you will notice a difference between the way he speaks with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern or Polonius and the way he speaks with Horatio. And this difference establishes the fact that Horatio is obviously quite different from Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and people like them. And Hamlet himself speaks about the quality of Horatio that he finds so attractive and so comforting. And that's why he thinks Horatio is his friend. Horatio, thou art even as just a man as ever my conversation coped withal. So he is the most level-headed guy whom Hamlet has ever talked with, had a conversation with. Oh, my dear Lord. And Horatio accepts this in a very humble way. Oh, no. Nay, do not think I flatter. For what advancement may I hope from thee, that no revenue hast but thy good spirits? So, compared to Hamlet, Horatio has nothing. So, why should Hamlet flatter Horatio? He would not have any material benefit from him. So, he says that I'm not flattering you, because people who wish to have any material benefit from another person, they flatter in a false way. So I'm not flattering you. And then he says, why should the poor be flattered? So he's calling Horatio poor. I mean, it's not like an insult. He just says that compared to me, you don't have money, like which I can wish to take from you. So why should I flatter you? No, let the candid tongue. Candid tongue means sweet tongue. People who use sweet words. What do? Lick absurd pomp and crook the pregnant hinges of the knee where thrift may follow fawning. Fawning is like when you praise somebody in a very false way. So he says that some people, they bend down, crook the pregnant hinges of the knee. That means when you bend down on your knees, it hurts. All right. But people do that. Why? Because they want to get something in return. Dost thou hear? Since my dear soul was mistress of her choice and could of men distinguish, I could make difference between who is a good person, who is not a good person, and my choice is free. Her election, her means my dear soul's election, hath sealed thee for herself. So I have kind of voted you as my friend because I know the difference between a good guy and a bad guy, or a worthless guy and a worthy person. For thou hast been as one in suffering all that suffers nothing. He likes Horatio because of the same reason of restraint, which we have seen, that he loves the idea of restraint, and he loves Horatio because he is not troubled overtly by suffering, by bad luck, and he is not excited in an uncontrollable way when good luck hits him. Okay, so he is always very moderate in his expressions, and we see that Hamlet loves moderation. A man that fortune's buffets and rewards has taken with equal thanks, and blessed are those whose blood and judgment are so well commingled. What he thinks, that is his judgment, is compatible with his action, his bodily action, his blood. So it is a very good thing that Horatio has in control his mind and his body, and they are in tune with each other. That they are not a pipe for fortune's finger to sound what stop she please. So one person can be in good fortune, bad fortune. So fortune controls your expression, the way you speak, behave. But with Horatio, he is so much in charge of his body and his mind that fortune cannot control his reaction to life. So Hamlet is quite impressed by this. Now, one thing strikes me too as a reader here, that Hamlet's constant expression that moderation is the key kind of shows that he himself wants to justify the fact that he is not acting in a rash manner. So he is justifying his lack of hasty action, repeatedly saying that moderation is the right way of action. Give me that man that is not passion's slave, and I will wear him in my heart's core. So Horatio is not passion's slave. He is in control of his passions, his emotions. I, in my heart of heart, as I do thee, something too much of this. So he thinks that, okay, I've talked enough on this, so now I'll talk about the real event that's going to take place today. There is a play tonight before the king. One scene of it comes near the circumstance which I have told thee of my father's death. So from this we realize that they have had a conversation about what the ghost has told Hamlet, what Hamlet makes of it, and this whole situation that he is in. So Horatio is like a friend philosopher for Hamlet at the moment. He trusts him. I prithee, when thou seest that act afoot. So he wants Horatio in that spot because he wants him to observe Claudius. I prithee, when thou seest that act afoot, even with the very comment of thy soul, observe mine uncle. If his occulted guilt do not itself unkennel. Unkennel means when a dog comes out of the kennel. So when the play will take place, that guilt inside Claudius might show like a dog emerging from a kennel. Like he will be caught red-handed in a way. It is a damned ghost that we have seen. So if he doesn't show any despair, any extra emotion, if he is not caught off guard, that means the ghost has lied to us. It's not my father's ghost. So he is going to test the word of the ghost here, which again makes it very appropriate, because Hamlet is an educated person. He's not a person who just takes the words of the ghost at face value. He's not Macbeth, who believes in the witches in the very first instant. He's an educated person. And it's important for him to have some tangible evidence against Claudius. So he says that if my uncle doesn't react, then that means the ghost was not a real one. It was like a false one. And my imaginations are as foul as Vulcan's tidy. Vulcan is a classical god, and he was the divine blacksmith. Blacksmiths have furnaces. So here, Vulcan's tidy means Vulcan's furnace. Hamlet says that if I see that my uncle has not reacted the way I'm expecting him to, that means my imaginations were dark, foul, like as dark as Vulcan's, that blacksmith's furnace, which is black, obviously with soot and all. Give him heedful note. Observe him carefully. For mine eyes will rivet to his fate. I will constantly look at Claudius. And after we will both our judgments join in censure of his seeming, in order to make sense of what he actually behaved as. He is not just trusting his own judgment, he is having a second pair of eyes. This is also very important because Hamlet knows that it is quite natural for him to feel enmity towards Claudius that might cloud his judgment. Horatio is a balanced outsider in this context, and he wants to have a second opinion. This is also important because if he did not have a second person observing Claudius, then we as audience might doubt that whatever he is interpreting is out of his own emotions and not out of reality. But when we will hear Horatio's approval of Hamlet's observation, then we will take it as truth. So this is a theatrical strategy on one hand, on Shakespeare's part. And on the part of Hamlet, it is quite a proper way to test his own understanding as well, not just the ghost's word. So here, two things are to be tested. One, the truth of the ghost, and second, the discretion power and the judgment of Hamlet himself. So it is not that he is just testing his father's ghost. He is also testing his own understanding of Claudius. Then Horatio says, I will definitely do what you're saying. Well, my lord, if he steal aught the whilst this play is playing, and escape detecting, I will pay the theft. So stealing here means Claudius giving away an expression which they will miss. If this happens that Claudius has expressed something, but he has missed, they have failed to detect, then he will take the blame. So he is very committed to what Hamlet has asked him to do. They are coming to the play. I must be idle. Get you a place. So now we are on high alert. The king and queen has entered the stage. How fares our cousin Hamlet? So King Claudius always enters with a lot of flourish and all. And look at the way in which Hamlet is answering him. Excellent in faith. Of the chameleon's dish, I eat the air, promise crammed. You cannot feed capons so. These two lines, trust me, contain way too many symbols, way too many suggestions, and let me just get you there. See, first of all, it's a very sarcastic reply. When Claudius says, how are you? He's saying excellent, as if he is very good. And then he says, of the chameleon's dish, I eat the air, promise crammed. So I'm eating air. Air is obviously not nutritious. But what about the chameleon? Now it was believed that chameleons, they eat air. Now why it is said so? Like you see this lizard-like colorful creature sitting blankly somewhere and its tongue protruding out in, you would feel as if it is eating air. Okay, so that image is there in his mind. But when he says that he is a chameleon eating air, it means that who is giving him air? Claudius. Claudius is giving him promises, false talk. So he survives on promises, not actual rewards or truth. So he is like a chameleon here. And then he says, you cannot feed capons so. Capons means, capons are castrated cocks. Whose reproductive organs are cut off and they are fattened by feeding them a lot in order to get the maximum meat out of them. Okay, so capons are that. So he says that I eat out of chameleon's dish. Chameleons have air, so I'm eating out of air, which is full of promises. But you cannot make a capon out of it. You cannot make fat chicken out of that. Now, apparently this is the surface meaning. But when you look at these two creatures, the chameleon and the capon, you would notice that the chameleon is a color changer. It changes itself depending on where it is. So it, in a way, represents deceit, hiding, secrets, right? Hamlet is hiding a secret from Claudius. But isn't Claudius also hiding a secret? Yes. When you look at the chameleon symbolism, then you see that both Hamlet and Claudius fit into it perfectly. And this has struck me more than once that somehow Hamlet could be seeing Claudius as a projection of himself. And could that be the reason why he is hesitating to strike him dead yet? I will keep coming back to this question in future also in our reading, because we will find those times and occasions when this idea of doppelganger re-emerges. Hamlet as the double of Claudius and how he sees himself, because here we are not very clear who the chameleon is. Both of them fit into the description. Keep this in your mind, back of your mind. Another expression, capons. You cannot feed capons. So that means Hamlet is kind of saying that I might be a person who might be away from a productive life. Like capons are away from a productive life. And we have seen how he has asked Ophelia to go to a nunnery. So it appears that he has chosen this non-sexual existence for himself, at least for now. So he is like the capon here. But capons should be fed real food, and he is not getting that here. Food in the sense, real nourishment, real love. So maybe this capon reference is a kind of a reference to Hamlet's barrenness. And at the same time, disturbingly, we are reminded of the fact that Claudius is also without children. So see how the creatures mentioned here in these two lines, they have some kind of link, not just to Hamlet, but also to Claudius. We'll move on. Claudius doesn't want to really get into these words. It is making him uncomfortable. So he says, he's detaching himself, saying, I have nothing with this answer, Hamlet. These words are not mine. So these words are not understood by me. So I have not accepted these words from you. So Hamlet is saying, these words are not mine too. No, not mine now. Why? Because once you speak something, the words go out of your mouth. So they are not inside you anymore. So they are not yours. But this is also a very funny thing to say, because words which are spoken out actually belong to us. People do say that you said this. Why is Hamlet saying that these words are not mine? He is reflecting the dishonesty of the court itself. That in this court, nobody sticks to his words. Whatever somebody says, the next day he denies. So I am also denying that I have said anything to you. And then he addresses Polonius, and whenever Hamlet speaks with Polonius, we see that there is always a kind of a mockery from Hamlet's side. My lord, you played once in the university, you say? That you performed in a play? That did I, my lord, and was accounted a good actor. What did you enact? I did enact Julius Caesar. Now see, Hamlet is by Shakespeare. Julius Caesar is by Shakespeare. It's like a intertextual referencing going on here. I was killed in the Capitol. Brutus killed me. And then Hamlet plays with the word Brutus and says, it was a brute part of him to kill so capital a calf there. So he's again making fun of Polonius here. And then he changes the topic, saying whether the players are ready or not. And Rosencrantz says, yes, they stay upon your patience. Then the queen, who has arrived along with Claudius, but has remained silent till now, she wants Hamlet to sit with her. Come hither, my dear Hamlet, sit by me. No, good mother. Here is metal more attractive. Now, Hamlet is speaking this while he is approaching Ophelia. That is, in a general way, he says that you are an old mother. Why should I go and sit with you? I have a young girl here. She is more attractive. But you might also see it in this way, that for Hamlet, Ophelia, Gertrude, that is his mother, they are just women. I mean, he is saying that the woman with whom he is not even having a proper relationship is comparable to his mother. which is a disturbing thing for normal viewers to accept. But again, maybe he wants to stay away from the king and the queen because that will help him look at their expressions. Right? If you're sitting right next to somebody, it's difficult to look at their faces. But when you're at a distance, you can observe their reactions in a better way. Now he approaches Ophelia, and Polonius is again excited. See, I told you, he's involved with my daughter. Then Hamlet goes on to Ophelia and says, Lady, shall I lie in your lap? Obviously, that's a very offensive proposal. Ophelia says, no, my lord. I'm in my head upon your lap. Now that is a better proposition because it is not very sexual if somebody just tries to, support their head on somebody's lap. Aye, my lord. And then Hamlet goes back to his earlier comment. Do you think I meant country matters? Country matters means base matters, unsophisticated things, bad things in your mind. That's why you said no earlier. I think nothing, my lord. That's a fair thought to lie between maid's legs. Now look at the uncomfortable situation in which he is putting Ophelia. Hamlet doesn't care in the world what people think about him. And he is in a position of power somehow. He's the king's nephew, but the king is not his father. And he makes fun of Polonius all the time. But Ophelia is in a different situation. She is here as a completely powerless entity, almost like a puppet. And the father is there, very domineering figure. Then the king is there, the queen is there, and the son of the queen is behaving in this manner. I wouldn't say that's a very comfortable thing to put her into. All right. So I would say that Hamlet is taking Ophelia too much for granted. And her position too much for granted. What is he expecting of her? To rebel openly with him? Why? Has he given her any ounce of security earlier? No. Still, she accepts his company. She doesn't object to him sitting next to her or with her because deep down she admires him as a person and she really feels bad that he's going all southward with his weird actions and words. She is happy that Hamlet is at least talking to her. And she says, what is it, my lord? Nothing. You are merry, my lord. Who, I? I, my lord. Oh God, you are only chick maker. What should a man do but be merry? For look you, how cheerfully my mother looks, and my father died within these 2 hours. Bang. Back to melancholy. So right when Ophelia is feeling good that Hamlet is having some light conversation with her, he gets back to the point, saying that I don't have any option but to be merry. See how my mother is enjoying herself. Nay, it's twice 2 months, my lord. So he says, my father died within these 2 hours. Now, from Ophelia, we are getting the real picture. It's 4 months. Okay, 4 months is also not a big deal of a time, but still it's not 2 hours. So Hamlet has kind of frozen himself onto that moment. For him, time is not moving the way it is moving for the others. Others are realistically looking at time. Hamlet is freezing himself down. Now it's not the fault of other people that Hamlet can't move on after his father's death. Other people have moved on. Okay. So long? Nay then, let the devil wear black, for I'll have a suit of sables. So I'll have a dark dress. I'm okay with it. Oh heavens, died 2 months ago and not forgotten yet? Then there is hope a great man's memory may outlive his life half a year. So he is now again making fun of Ophelia's words that you're saying that my father has died some 2 months back, which means it is a great thing that we still remember him. So he's kind of making fun of her. And then before he even finishes whatever he's talking about, the hot boys play again, the dump show enters. Now what is a dump show? Dump show is like a trailer. Okay, like you have trailers before serials and series and movies, just like that. So dumb show will come, perform without any words, only through gesture. They will give an idea about what the play is going to be on. Okay. So this is the moment when we see that finally Hamlet is moving from an internal contemplation to some external action. Now, what does this dumb show present? Here, there's a description of the dumb show. We'll just read. Enter a king and a queen very lovingly. The queen embracing him and he her. She kneels and makes show of protestation unto him. He takes her up, declines his head upon her neck, lays him down upon a bank of flowers. She, seeing him asleep, leaves him, and then a nun comes in a fellow. So, the king is lying down upon a bank of flowers and the queen has gone away. And a third person comes in. A nun comes in a fellow, takes off his crown, kisses it, and pours poison in the king's ears and exit. The queen returns, finds the king dead, and makes passionate action. The poisoner, the person who killed, with some 2 or 3 mutes means who are also silent players, comes in again, seeming to lament with her. So he doesn't tell her that I have killed this guy, or we see that there is no connection between the murderer and the queen. The dead body is carried away. The poisoner woos the queen with gifts. She seems loath and unwilling a while, but in the end accepts his love. And they go away. Ophelia is staring at the dumb show and she can't make much of it, and she asks Hamlet. So Hamlet is her interpreter here. What means this, my lord? Mary, this is mishing malecho. It means mischief. So it is a mischievous thing that we saw. Belike this show imports the argument of the play. So this dumb show is like a synopsis of what's going to happen in the play. And then the prologue comes in. So prologue is another intro. So here, before the main play begins, it's a lot of introduction to what is about to happen. So by the time the play begins, the audience present there, they already know what the play is going to be about. They're mentally prepared. Okay. We shall know by this fellow. The players cannot keep counsel. They'll tell all. Hamlet rather wants some element of mystery to remain, to detect Claudius's reaction in a better way, but then he sees that the dumb show has shown everything and the prologue is going to tell the rest of it. Will he tell us what the show meant? The person who will be speaking the prologue? I or any show that you will show him. Be not you ashamed to show, he'll not shame to tell you what it means. So again he makes fun of her, that he is the prologue speaker. Whatever is to be shown, he will interpret. If you show something that belongs to you, that is her body, he will interpret that too. And Ophelia is saying, you are not, I'll mark the play. So there is a kind of maybe a little bit of hope emerging in her mind that he's making jokes at me, so he's in a good mood and all that. For us and for our tragedy, here stooping to your clemency, we beg your hearing patiently. So he goes out. Okay, so he says, is this a prologue or the posy of a ring? I mean, he didn't even say anything. It is brief, my lord, as woman's love. Again, Hamlet goes back to his old form. Okay. Now, 2 players come in, king and queen. And then there will be long speeches, first by the player king, then by the player queen. So I'll just read quickly through them. Full 30 times had Phoebus's cart gone round Neptune's salt wash. Now, Phoebus is sun, Neptune is sea. So it's all about the way in which the sun goes up and sets down in the ocean. So there is 30 times this has happened, which means 30 days. So you can see how flowery the speeches are. And this was to be done because it was a play within a play. Now already the world of Hamlet that was placed on stage in front of us belonged to the world of theatre. Hamlet was the play. So that had a language which was a bit different from common language, because the language of Hamlet as a play is a language of play. Now, if you are to place a play inside a play, you have to make that language even more different from the language of the play Hamlet. Otherwise, you cannot understand the difference. If Plato were alive, we would say it is like 4 times removed from reality. Because according to him, drama is twice removed from reality, and this is drama inside drama. So then again, 2 into 2, 4 times. That would his calculation be. Anyway, that's why the language used in the play, within the play, is so different and flowery, more flowery than the speech which is normally used in the play Hamlet itself. Okay. So what he actually means in all this, he says that they are married for some time now, and this is all about the time, and so complicated way to put it that way. The queen says, the player queen, so many journeys may the sun and moon make us again count over ere love be done. So she wants him and herself to be in love for again so many years. So we see that they are very much in love with each other. And at the same time, the queen detects a little bit of a change in the king. But who is me? You are sick of late, so far from cheer and from your former state. One more thing you would notice, that they are speaking in rhymes. Normally, Shakespeare's plays are written in blank verse, but these lines are rhymed. Somehow I feel that this also is deliberately done in order to set these lines differently apart from the real play. Okay, it's like the words of the witches in Macbeth, where they also speak in rhymes. So she's asking in a way, what has happened? Why do you look different? What has really changed? So the player king says that I think I won't live for long and I will leave you, and I feel that you'll also get married after that. And then the queen protests, oh, confound the rest. Such love must needs be treason in my breast. She says that if you die and I marry somebody, it's like betrayal. In second husband, let me be accursed. None wed the second, but who killed the first? I'm pretty sure this is the line that Hamlet put in. Okay. And Hamlet is reacting to these lines. Wormwood, very bitter, very bitter. Wormwood is a bitter herb. The instances that second marriage move are base respects of thrift, but none of love. People do marry a second time, but usually for money, not for love. A second time, I kill my husband dead when second husband kisses me in bed. Okay, so she is really being very violent about it, that she's not going to accept the fact that somebody else is her husband. She'll feel like she's murdering her husband over again. And the player king is very moderate in his expressions. I do believe you think what now you speak. I'm not doubting you. I know you love me so much right now. But then, this is now. Things might change later. But what we do determine, oft we break. Sometimes we promise and then we break it. So it's very realistic here. Purpose is but the slave to memory, of violent birth, but poor validity. So when we decide something, we decide on an impulse, but then it doesn't have a validity. It doesn't stay for long. We lose our passion, our grip, our intensity of that promise, and then we forget, because our memory is somehow very much linked to what purpose we have. And then he says, most necessary it is that we forget to pay ourselves what to ourselves is debt. So we make it our necessity that we forget, we rethink as if we had never thought something before. Okay. And then he says, this world is not for aye, nor it's not strange that even our loves should with our fortunes change. He is a very, very realistic person, and he knows that whatever we claim now may not be true, or we ourselves might not stand by it if times change, if fortunes change, and he accepts that. But the queen goes on declaring her love. And in fact, she ends with this: if once a widow, ever I be wife. So if I am ever a widow, I'll never get married again. And then Hamlet is commenting, if she should break it now, the player king, he knows everything, that nothing will last, but he says, okay, that's all right. You can leave now. I'll just rest a bit. So this is the point where the queen leaves that stage where the play is going on. Sleep, rock thy brain, and never come mischance between us twain. And she goes away. At this point, Hamlet turns to his mother. Madam, how like you this play? The lady protests too much, methinks. Now, it has hurt her personally that she was talking about second marriage as something very foul, detestable. It is as if Gertrude was feeling uncomfortable because she has also married the second time. And I'm sure any woman who has married for the second time would feel quite uncomfortable here. Oh, but she'll keep her word. So Hamlet is actually saying what will not happen in the play. We know that the queen will get remarried to the murderer. The dumb show has already shown it. But he still says she'll keep her word. Have you heard the argument? Is there no offense in it? Now, Claudius also feels offended, and it might look even natural that he has married Gertrude, and Gertrude might feel bad listening to all this. No, they do but jest. Poison in jest. No offense in the world. No, it's just a play. Why are you taking it seriously? Now Claudius is getting interested. What do you call the play? What is the name? The Mousetrap? Mary? How? Tropically? This play, it's symbolically a mousetrap. We know why it is a mousetrap. It's like Claudius is the mouse and the play is going to trap him. But he says that it's called Mousetrap. This play is the image of a murder done in Vienna. Gonzago is the duke's name, his wife Baptista. You shall see anon. It's a knavish piece of work, but what of that? Your Majesty and we that have free souls, it touches us not. So it's a villainous plot, okay? But then we shouldn't worry because we are innocent people. So that is how he's trying to somehow push the plugs in Claudius and see whether he reacts or not. Let the gold jade winds, our withers are unwrung. So only the guilty will feel the pain. The innocent have nothing to fear. Now, the murderer will come in. And the name of the murderer is Lucianus. This is one Lucianus, nephew to the king. Now, instead of making the murderer the brother of the king, a little change is found here. That the murderer in this play within the play, the Mousetrap, is Lucianus. And Ophelia is impressed that Hamlet knows so much. You are as good as a chorus, my lord. Chorus were those groups of women in ancient Greek plays who used to stand on one side and speak about what's going on in the play. So they were like the outsiders and at the same time commentators on action. Hamlet is doing the same thing here. I could interpret between you and your love if I could see the puppets dallying. So Hamlet says that I am a good interpreter. If I could know about you all, I could interpret you too. You are keen, my lord, you are keen. It would cost you a groaning to take off my edge. So I am on edge now. I am not being very open with you. But you might change me if you engage with me physically. And that's why he's saying it would cost you a groaning to take off my edge. That's very suggestive. Still better and worse. Now, Hamlet's expressions are getting wittier. So it is getting better. But the suggestions are getting worse. Okay, so now he's being more offensive. And the more interesting part is this, when she says still better and worse, it reminds us of that wedding vow that Christians take when they get married. You know, they will live with each other in sickness or in health. And then there's this expression for better, for worse. So no matter how fortune treats them, they will be together. That's the idea. So when she uses the expression still better and worse, we have somehow this feeling that psychologically she really wants to get married to Hamlet and she wants to use these words with him. But the situation has turned so that she cannot use them, so she's using them in other contexts. But Hamlet, he catches the words. So you must take your husband, still better and worse. Begin, murderer. So now he again shifts his focus to the actors on stage. Pox, leave thy damnable faces and begin. Come, thy croaking raven doth bellow for revenge. In the play, we don't know if there is anybody who is going to take revenge. But here we know that it's Hamlet himself he's talking about. That after you finish your acting, I will detect my uncle's change in expression and then I will take revenge. So my revenge depends on your performance. So he wants them to perform. So Lucianus, the player who plays the part of the murderer, he speaks. Thoughts black, hands apt, drugs fit, and time agreeing. Confederate season. Else no creature seeing, there are no witnesses. Thou mixtured rank of midnight weeds collected, with Hecate's ban thrice blasted, thrice infected. Hecate is the head witch. We also have this reference in Macbeth. So it's witchcraft that has led to that production of that poison. Thy natural magic and dire property on wholesome life usurp immediately. So this is a poison which is very potent and it is poured into the king's ears. And Hamlet interprets. He poisons him in the garden for his estate. His name is Gonzago. The story is extant and writ in choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. Right then, the king gets up. What? Frighted with false fire? Gertrude is also a bit shaken. How fares my lord? Now, Gertrude doesn't stand up. Somehow, as audience, we see that Gertrude is not reacting to the play. She is reacting to Claudius's reaction. Give over the play. Polonius doesn't want the play to go on. He feels that the king is somehow not willing to watch the play. Give me some light. Away. Lights, lights, lights. Everybody is calling lights, lights, lights. Why does Claudius need light? He's a master of masking his emotions. But the visual recreation of his secret crime, maybe it has shattered his psychological defenses. His demand for light is very, very symbolic. It's like the darkness inside him is so visible now that he wants light to obliterate that darkness. Everybody leaves. Hamlet, Horatio, they are still there. Why? Let the stricken deer go weep. The heart ungalled play. Stricken deer is the wounded deer, the guilty person, that is Claudius. So he says that, see how the deer who is struck is going off and lamenting, weeping. And the heart, H-A-R-T. Again, this is a pun. When you speak out the word out loud, it sounds like H-E-A-R-T. So heart ungalled. Ungalled again means something which is not harmed. So the deer which is not harmed will play, which will not weep. But Claudius is reacting, so which is like he's weeping, showing that he is struck. But heart ungalled also might sound like a heart which is not filled with bitterness or with poison. So again, the parallelism is very clear. Yes, Claudius is the deer which is struck, so he has gone away. But is Hamlet the heart which is filled with no bitterness? No, he is also struck. So the parallelism continues. For some must watch while some must sleep. So runs the world away. Would not this, sir, and a forest of feathers, if the rest of my fortunes turn Turk with me, with 2 provincial roses on my raised shoes, get me a fellowship in a cry of players, sir. So he wants to say that if everything goes wrong, at least I can still be a good theatre person, don't you think? Half a share. A whole one, aye. For thou dost know, O Damon dear, this realm dismantled was of Jove himself and now reigns here a very, very Pajok. Now, he doesn't end with a rhyme here. He could have, but he doesn't. As if what he's saying here is, why is he saying Damon? Damon is like this Greek good guy, a friend. So he's addressing Horatio as if he's speaking in a play and saying that, dost know, O Damon dear, this realm dismantled was of Jove himself. So Jove was the king of the gods, Greek gods. So he says that my father was like the king of gods. And now this realm is ruled by a peacock. Pajok is like a peacock. You might have rhymed. The same thing that we thought, right? That why didn't he rhyme? Perhaps if he rhymed, then it would give a lot of importance to Claudius, that he is fitting in. The fact that he is not fitting in is proven by the fact that it is not rhyming. Oh, good Horatio, I'll take the host's word for 1,000 pounds. Didst perceive? You saw what happened? Very well, my lord. Upon the talk of the poisoning, so right when the players were talking about poisoning, I did very well note him. Aha, come some music, come the recorders, for if the king like not the comedy, why then belike he likes it not, Purdy. Come some music. Purdy is Purdue, which is by God. Okay. Again, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern come in, right when they are trying to have some music and all. Good my lord, vouchsafe me a word with you. Look at the formal expression, official way he's addressing. Sir, a whole history. That means not just a word. Give me everything you have. The king, sir. I, sir, what of him? Is in his retirement marvelous distempered. So the king is not at all in a good mood or is looking really bad now. With drink, sir? So distempered with drink? No, my lord, rather with choler. Choler is bitterness, bad mood. Okay. Hamlet says, what will I do? I'm not a doctor. Okay. Your wisdom should show itself more richer to signify this to his doctor. For me to put him to his purgation, if you want me to go to his room now, give him some help, it will only make him worse. Would perhaps plunge him into far more choler. Now, choler, let me explain to you, is one of the 4 fluids in the body according to medieval belief in the theory of humors. It was believed that our emotions, our physical health, well-being, everything is connected to the way in which the 4 humors are mixed in our system. If they are proportionate, we are balanced individuals. If any one particular humor is high or more in proportion, then we suffer through some kind of disproportion. So choler is one of them. The other 3 were blood, phlegm and melancholy. All right. Guildenstern also tells him that not just the king, the queen is also kind of agitated and wants to meet Hamlet. So he says, the queen, your mother, in most great affliction of spirit hath sent me to you. You're welcome. Nay, good my lord, this courtesy is not of the right breed. If it shall please you to make a wholesome answer, I will do your mother's commandment. If not, your pardon and my return shall be the end of my business. So either you tell me if you are going or not, I'll accordingly communicate. Sir, I cannot. What, my lord? Make you a wholesome answer. My wit's diseased. But, sir, such answer as I can make, you shall command. So he's again playing with the expression wholesome answer. He says, I can't give you a wholesome answer. My wit is not healthy, so my answers won't be healthy. Or rather, as you say, my mother. Therefore, no more, but to the matter. My mother, you say, then thus she says, your behavior hath struck her into amazement and admiration. You have made her amazed and all. A wonderful son that can so astonish a mother. Good. My mother is amazed by me. That's my good achievement. But is there no sequel at the heels of this mother's admiration, I impart? So is there anything else other than admiration that she has for me? Any other information you have? She desires to speak with you in her closet. or you go to bed. We shall obey, were she 10 times our mother. Have you any further trade with us? My lord, you once did love me, so why are you being so rude? So he is really asking him to be like normal Hamlet, like he used to be before. So I do still by these pickers and stealers. Good my lord, what is your cause of distemper? Now Rosencrantz wants to know why Hamlet is in a bad mood. And he says, we are your friends, you should tell us. Sir, I lack advancement. I don't want to advance myself. I don't have the motivation. How can that be? When you have the voice of the king himself for your succession in Denmark, you will be advancing to be the king next. And you are saying you don't have advancement. Aye, but sir, while the grass grows, the proverb is something musty. Again, he plays with words. So this goes on, okay? He makes fun of Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, and he, in fact, when the musicians come in, he asks them if they can play and all. Guildenstern goes on saying that I can't play, but then this goes on for some time. So eventually, the thing that Hamlet says when he repeatedly goes through denial and all, they can't play. He says that you don't understand the stops in the musical instrument, but you understand me. That is his point here. Why look you now, how unworthy a thing you make of me. You would play upon me. You would seem to know my stop. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. You would sound me from my lowest note to the top of my compass, and there is much music, excellent voice in this little organ, yet cannot you make it speak? So you think you can make me speak and you can play me like an instrument, but you can't play this organ, which is very easy to make music. So it's blood. So this apostrophe S is like a censor going on here. Christ's blood, God's wounds, that kind of a swearing. Blood. Do you think I am easier to be played on than a pipe? Pipe means a musical instrument, like a flute. Call me what instrument you will, though you can fret me, yet you cannot play upon me. So if you can't play the musical instrument, how can you even dream of playing upon me? And then Polonius comes and he says, God bless you, sir. Hamlet again trying to make fun of Polonius with his very tone itself. My lord, the queen would speak with you and presently. And then Hamlet again begins to mock him. Do you see yonder cloud? Yonder means that. He points at some cloud from somewhere. Do you see yonder cloud that's almost in shape of a camel? By the mass, and it's like a camel indeed. Now, Polonius never disagrees. He always agrees to what the superiors say in order to please them. And then Hamlet, who was saying that the cloud was like a camel, he changes and he says, methinks it is like a weasel. It is back like a weasel, or like a whale, very like a whale. So whatever he is saying, he is parroting. Then I will come to my mother by and by. They fool me to the top of my bent. I will come by and by. I will say so. By and by is easily said. Exit Polonius. Leave me, friends. Everybody leaves and we have Hamlet alone on stage. And when he's alone, we know we will be given a beautiful soliloquy. And what does he say? This is a very crucial moment. He is waiting to get into his mother's closet, speak with her. And what is going on in his mind? 'Tis now the very witching time of night, when churchyards yawn. Churchyards yawn means open their mouth. That is, people are buried in the churchyard. It yawns means the coffins are open and the ghosts come out. So this is the time when it is believed that ghosts come out. Alright? And hell itself breathes out contagion to this world. Now, could I drink hot blood and do such bitter business as the day would quake to look on? Can I do something just because this is a witching hour? Can I just do something which in the daytime I would be scared to look at? Is it allowed? What is he talking about? He's talking about killing his own mother. Is he up to it? Soft. No, he's not. And he's stopping himself. The restraint, the moderation he was advocating in the beginning of the scene must be realized within him right now. So it's like it's coming to the full circle. This is how Shakespeare makes a big scene come to full circle. What is talked about in the beginning will be materialized in the end. And we see Hamlet talking himself back to moderation. O heart, lose not thy nature. Let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. Nero, a ruler who killed his own mother, ruled with cruelty, killed his relatives. And which mother? The mother who made him successful, that mother. So he says, I don't want to be Nero. I don't want to kill my own mother. Let me be cruel, not unnatural. So what is the other option left for him to show his cruelty? If not in action, but then in words. I will speak daggers to her. A beautiful metaphor here. His words will be like daggers, but use none. I will not use a real dagger against her. My tongue and soul in this be hypocrites. My soul will not be the murderer. My tongue will be the murderer. So I will murder her with my words. I will hurt her with my words. How in my words soever she be shent, to give them seals, never my soul consent. So I cannot kill her. I will not allow myself that. So before going to Gertrude's chamber, one thing is for sure, that Hamlet will not kill Gertrude. He is not yet sure if Gertrude had any hand in the murder or not. But we somehow feel that even if he found out that she was involved, he wouldn't act against her the way he would act against the uncle, which is understandable here at this point. And perhaps he has some idea from the reaction of Gertrude already that maybe my mother was not involved in the murder, but her offense is marrying the uncle. With this mind, he is now going to approach his mother in her closet. Will he commit murder there? That's the question you will find answer to in our next class. And don't you miss that scene as well, because it is a very important question when it comes to reference to context type answers in your exams. In fact, the whole of Act 3 is very crucial for line by line reading. Thank you all for staying with me till the end of this scene. I hope to see you all in my next video, which is going to come very, very soon. Till then, stay subscribed, stay happy. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye-bye.